What's up, guys? Ted here yet again for another Top 10 Tuesday. This week, gonna go right into it. It's gonna be my top 10 Super Nintendo games. I guess before I get started, though, I do want to say that this was a very tough decision for me. Super Nintendo hits home with a lot of great games, a lot of great series started there as well. But anyway, number 10 is Donkey Kong Country. For me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of other Super Nintendo owners out there, this was the first game that you owned for your Super Nintendo. It was different because I personally was used to Mario games, and it was a different protagonist with a more, had a very tight platforming mechanic. You had the Donkey Kong, Diddy Kong, two-life situation. Plus, it broke ground with its kind of 3D models and the kind of 3D backgrounds and enemies, which was new for someone like me to see at that young of an age. Blew away, in my mind, anything that I ever saw on the Sega Genesis. So, that's why it's on this list. Number 9, Maximum Carnage. This is a Spider-Man video game. One of the first ones I remember having fond memories of as a child. I played some on the Sega Genesis, and I think other ones on the Super Nintendo, but this is the one that really stuck with me as a game that I really enjoyed. It had a lot of the classic kind of beat-em-up mechanics, It also had, the one point, the divergence where you could play as Spider-Man or Venom. It was also my first introduction to the character of Carnage, who grew up growing up and even now is one of my absolute favorite Marvel villains. And again, I just have really fond memories of playing this game growing up and never actually being able to beat it, so I should go back and try that now. But just, I don't know, it just has nostalgia for me, and, it's my favorite superhero and one of my favorite villains all in the same game. Number 8, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time. Again, I was a kid that grew up originally playing the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game for the NES. If anybody's ever seen the Angry Video Game Nerd episode on that, you know how frustrating that was. And then Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 came out, / the arcade game came out, and it was just leaps and bounds ahead of that. And it was great beat 'em up. It had 2 to 4 player action depending on where you had it set up. And Turtles in Time, I think, just took that and refined it and made it better, added more enemies, added more levels. And it's just a classic beat 'em up that holds up today. So if you haven't played it, I highly recommend it. I was actually at a convention this weekend where they had a Turtles in Time 4-player arcade cabinet. I mean, talk about bringing me back. Just a great game. And if you're a Ninja Turtles fan, I'm sure you already know it, but you should definitely try it out. Number 7, I'm sure you knew it had to be somewhere on this list. Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger, number 7, you say? Well, part of the reason is I never really played Chrono Trigger growing up. I saw it at the local video store every time I went there to go rent a game, and I almost always picked it up. And just off the cover for the fact that Frog was there as a character, and I was like, I want this game. I want to play as a ninja frog, because I couldn't really tell from the back. I also never had played an RPG before, so this would have been my first. But for one reason or another, I always ended up picking up another game. And obviously that's changed now, and I've gone and I've played the game. I own it on, I think, my DS. I own it on the Wii U. And I played it on emulators in college. I mean, if you know anything about RPGs, you know why Chrono Trigger is so great. And it spawned what I think is a really great sequel in Chrono Cross. I'd love for there to be a third iteration. There was talks of a Chrono Break for a while, but sadly that never happened. But I mean, if you haven't played Chrono Trigger, do yourself a favor and find a way to play it. Emulate it if you have to. It's just a great RPG with a great story, great characters, and I mean, Frog. Number 6 is Super Metroid. I kind of was probably a little bit different than other people. I didn't get introduced really to Samus until Smash Brothers for the Nintendo 64. Was the first time I learned about Samus and who the character was, and the whole Metroid series as a whole. I never played Metroid on any... I knew of it for the Game Boy, but I never played it. And then I actually, in high school, went to like a local hobby shop, and they happened to have Super Metroid, I think for like $15. So I bought it, and then I went and hooked it up to my Super Nintendo and played through it. And wow, blew my mind. as a Castlevania fan at the time, this was like, you know, I didn't even know that there was a correlation between Metroid and the whole Metroidvania kind of vibe that's out there, or style of game, I should say. And I've gone back and played Metroid since, but I love Super Metroid because it just, I feel obviously they refined on everything from Metroid. The controls are tight, and I never really got into the 3D Metroid games like Metroid Prime. I played them, but I don't think you can really top just the pinnacle of that kind of gameplay that is Super Metroid. I sort of mentioned it in Metroid, but I'm a huge Castlevania fan. So number 5 would be Super Castlevania 4. I remember playing the first Castlevania in like a weird arcade standee in like a Denny's or something when I was like 4. And for whatever reason that stuck with me, and I love Castlevania to this day. You know, I've purchased and played so many different fan Castlevania games, and you know, I even have a soft spot in my heart for Castlevania 64 and Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, regarded as some of the worst Castlevania games out there. But Super Castlevania 4 just takes all that was Castlevania 1 and refines it, because you are playing as Simon Belmont. It's pretty much the same story, just with tighter controls, the ability to move the whip in 360 degrees, new enemies, updated music, and again, I'm a huge Castlevania fanboy, so how can it not be on this list? Number 4 is Super Mario World. If you didn't start with Donkey Kong Country, chances are you started with Super Mario World, and either one was a great choice, in my opinion. This is what introduced us to Yoshi as a character, and I just remember spending countless hours playing this game. Then I remember finding out that there were different colored Yoshis. I remember getting to Star Road and going through the whole like tubular different levels, and then changing the way the enemies look completely. Finding the different hidden switches and the secret area and all the different like little nuances of the game, and it's just, I mean, I finally in college was able to beat it, you know, 100%, which I think is 96% or whatever the weird glitches in the game that you can never get to the full 100. But it's such a good game, and I love going back and starting over and playing from the beginning. It's one of those games that I don't mind deleting my save and then going back and playing through it again, just because I enjoy it so much. And again, it's just one of those quintessential have-to-have Super Nintendo games. Number 3, Mega Man X. I'm not going to say this is my first real introduction to Mega Man, because I did play several different Mega Mans growing up on the original Nintendo, but I don't think I really understood what Mega Man was about, aside from the strategy VHS tape that my grandmother bought me by accident, thinking that it was a video game that told you how to beat Mega Man 2. Mega Man X is one of those games that I remember one of my friends got. I think Sean actually was the one who got it, and then I remember playing so much of this game and trying to figure out how to beat it and what order to go in. I remember having debates in elementary school of which boss you should start with, and all the different ways to find the different heart tanks and the sub tanks, and it took the classic Mega Man and kind of updated it for the new 16-bit era. It had a cool intro stage. It had, you know, you had all the Robot Masters, which were now animal themed. You had heart tanks and sub tanks, and you know, going back to old levels with new powers, and I don't know, it's just, I mean, Mega Man X2 and 3 were great, and you know, everything else, but Mega Man X1, just another one of those games where, like, if I have access to it, I'll just sit through and play it. I remember I downloaded it on the Wii U randomly, and whatever I was supposed to be doing, I just stopped and played through and beat Mega Man X because I could. Plus, I mean, hidden things like the Hadouken that I remember having arguments with my friends of whether or not this was actually in the game. Back before the internet was really a thing, and we were going off of what somebody heard from somebody else, or somebody read this in a Nintendo Power or whatever. Again, just another great game that paved the way for a lot of future kind of platformer shooters like all the rest of the Mega Man series. This one's for my sister, but number 2 is Kirby Superstar. This was also my first introduction to the character of Kirby, was Kirby Superstar, and what a fantastic game it is. If you know anything about Kirby, you know that this is one of the most highly regarded Kirby games, if not, everyone's, this is what a Kirby game should be. Having the ability to play 2 players with the helper mechanic, and having, be able to switch them out to computers or have them be player controlled. Just the sheer amount of different copy abilities that you had from introducing things like Yo-Yo Kirby and all the different crazy abilities. I mean, and it was also sort of like 7 games in one. As you'd play through one, you'd unlock another, and some would be fairly straightforward. Some would be like a collector mechanic, like the minecart themed game. And then at the end, you would unlock kind of the tournament battle mode. And I don't know, I mean, a lot of great Kirby things came from this game. And I remember sinking countless hours into this with my sister. And then doing that again when we both got it for the DS when they made Kirby Superstar Ultra. Like I said, Kirby is just a fantastic game. Unfortunately, I've played a lot of the other Kirbys, hoping Kirby 64 and a lot of the DS and Game Boy ones, and I don't think anything's ever measured up to how great Kirby Superstar was. And I'd be interested to see if they could find a way to bring that kind of magic back. Before I jump to number 1, let's talk about a few honorable mentions. Games that are great and I've played, but they're not on my personal top 10 list for one reason or another. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. To be honest, I mean, everyone knows I love Zelda stuff. I mean, you can see the Hylian Shield and the Master Swords right there. But growing up, I never played Link to the Past. My first real introduction to, aside from renting the original Zelda once, my first real introduction was Ocarina of Time, and that's my favorite Zelda game. And I really need to go back and play through Link to the Past again, having not played through it in years. And then actually, I have A Link Between Worlds, and I've actually never played it, so I don't know what that story is like. Another honorable mention goes to Star Fox, just a game that I never played growing up. I had experience with Star Fox 64, but I don't know, Star Fox never really drew me in like it did a lot of other people. What other games? I don't know, those are really the big ones that come to my mind. I had Contra 3, which is another great game, I don't think deserves to be on my top 10. A great game, but I just didn't really get into it. Oh, and Super Mario Kart. I played Super Mario Kart back in the day, but again, I didn't really play video games too much until I got a Nintendo 64, anything kind of consistent. So for me, Mario Kart 64 is the one that really sticks out in my mind as my favorite, and on my original list. So anyway, now that I got those couple of honorable mentions out of the way, let's jump in to number 1. Maybe you've guessed it already, but number 1 is Super Mario RPG. Wow, this game. I remember playing it. This, I think, was my first introduction to an actual RPG style, separate screen for battle kind of game in my entire life. Paved the way for me liking games like Pokemon and things like that. And I remember renting this game. This is one of those games where I took it back to Blockbuster and then re-rented it again so that I could play it. And then years later, after realizing that I should have bought it when I had the chance and it was harder to come by, I searched everywhere to try to find this game. And then it turns out my neighbor had it, and I bought it from him for $20, and I've never looked back on that decision. It was a Squaresoft RPG with Nintendo characters. So, Squaresoft, obviously one of the best RPG creators out there. So, the game's going to be great. It took a different mechanic. It made Mario the silent protagonist, which was kind of a different thing, especially now in the Nintendo 64 and stuff like now. Everybody has the "it's a me, Mario" kind of thing in their head for, him always talking. But it also had cool Easter eggs and things like finding Link and finding Samus in the game. It also had, it introduced 2 new characters, 2 of my favorite characters that have never made a comeback, Geno and Mallow. For me, it was what actually introduced Bowser as Bowser rather than King Koopa. And it was just a great RPG that had a lot of, I mean, there were countless hidden things and different ways you could go about things, finding secret items and doing all this stuff that you could potentially play through the game and never encounter any of those. And I don't know, I really was just, it's just such a great game, and I'm such a big fan of it, so it had to be my number 1. And I really don't know what else to say. So with that, that's it, guys. That's my top 10 Super Nintendo games. What are your top 10 Super Nintendo games? Feel free to leave them in the comments below. Let me know, do you think this order sucks? What would you change? Is it ludicrous to not put Zelda on a top 10 list for Super Nintendo? I realize it sounds kind of crazy, but anyway, that's my list. I'd love to hear what you guys think, and feel free to let me know any ideas you have for future top 10 lists that I should do. So with that, guys, I'll see you next time.